Hi, Abby here to tell you about the latest drop from the Lens Library. First, for context, the National Wetlands Inventory is a program from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to map wetlands across the U.S. This data is incredibly valuable for understanding wetland presence and informing land use planning from infrastructure development to conservation. But one challenge is keeping it up to date with current wetland conditions. Using Massachusetts as an example, this map from MassGIS shows the last time data was updated across the state, with some areas still using wetland delineations from the 70s. We're making it easier than ever to add this data straight to your Lens account, so you can make informed assessments of how wetlands have changed in recent decades. Let's look at an example together. This is a solar project, so here we're looking at NAPE imagery from 2016 compared to 2018. You can see here where the solar farm was installed. But back in 2016, when they were doing the planning for this project, they may have looked at the National Wetlands Inventory dataset, which you can see overlaid on the map here. It's very important when you're doing project planning to take a look at this dataset because you want to protect these valuable ecosystems, and any development that happens on a wetland can lead to mitigation efforts that can be very expensive and time-consuming. So they may have looked at this data set and said, okay, we know we want to avoid these wetland areas. But what they may not have known is whether these were still true representations of where wetlands were present on the landscape. So for example, this area here on the top right, it's referred to as a freshwater pond in the Wetlands Inventory dataset, and it looks like that's still a pretty accurate delineation of that pond. But over here, we can see this freshwater forested shrub wetland. It's hard to see. It might be a seasonal thing, it may be covered in trees at this time of year, but it's really hard to tell whether there's a wetland under there or not. In the 2018 data, again, it's pretty hard to see, and it may be a seasonal wetland. So we want to look at a few different points in time to make sure. Let me pull up the 2019 MassGIS aerial imagery. This is a great data source, and it shows us the spring period where I would expect to see water on the ground. But again, we don't see anything for this freshwater forested shrub wetland. So that leads me to think that this wetland may have been present when the dataset was created, but is no longer present. Another way that we can verify this is using the analysis tool. So I'm going to select overlay here and click on that area and look at surface water for the last year. It looks like there's no dates at all where surface water is present. So this gives me additional confirmation that a wetland may have been here in the past but is no longer there today. And this is the kind of information that's really important to know so that if you're planning a new project that may overlap with this previous wetland boundary, you don't have to worry about running into a wetland today. Here's one more example. This is a wetland restoration site where cranberry bogs were restored into a wetland over the last 2 decades. So here we can see back in 2003, this is the NAPE aerial imagery, that this was a cranberry bog. That's very clearly delineated in the Wetlands Inventory data, and we can see that visually in this imagery. But if we scroll to more recent imagery, this is a scene from NearMap, we can see that that wetland has changed dramatically. There's more sinuosity in the streams, we can see ponding, there's a lot of regeneration and restoration happening over the last 2 decades that are not reflected in this overlay. So this is important context for us to have, both to understand the history of a place based on when these delineations were made, but also what it looks like today, how it's changing, how it's evolving, and what that means for land use planning currently.